Hey guys, welcome to Moments of Clarity. I am your host, Charlie Tubbs III. I'm so excited that you guys came to hang out with me today. What I want you to do me a huge favor and share the feed. I have my special guest today, who is Nick Jones, who's going to be talking with us. We have a lot of conversations we've already been having offline, and so I just thought it was good to have these conversations live. That way you can tap into a lot of the conversations that we're having behind the scenes. So I'm excited to have my brother here with me. Uh, let's chop up, Mr. Nick Jones. How are you, buddy? Hey,
Hey,
Nick, can
doing
you?
good, man. What's up, Charlie?
Man, I am great today,
Yeah,
man. How have you been, man? It's been a lot going on in the world today, but I mean, I'm happy to see you, brother.
yeah, we're doing all right. The church has done pretty well considering everything going on, but like everybody else, we're trying to figure out how to navigate, how to be different during this time and how to still connect, but we're not meeting in a building. It's been how do you continue to minister to people when you can't be that close? Like it's
Yeah.
and right now it's getting harder and harder. People are really struggling. So it's like, and you want to be there with everybody and support them, and yet figuring out creative ways to do so is hard.
Yeah, so that's cool, Nick. So I know who you are, and I love who you are. I consider you to be a friend and an ally to me, and to this cause. But I want you to tell people about you, your church, because you're a pastor. Also, tell people about your
Mhm.
church, and then what your mission is, what you try to communicate on any given Sunday morning, or just in life in general.
Yeah, I'm not a pastor by planning, I should say. It came about by a kind of a miraculous and call from God, I guess. But I didn't really want to be, and I've spent the first 12 years of my life working in nonprofit work and ministry. And in that case, what I did is I worked to bridge churches to high crime communities in Fresno. I would then go to those churches and teach for 6, 8 weeks at a time, and trying to help teach classes on things like racial reconciliation, having God's heart for the needy, how do we do justice in our city, a lot of different things that we would cover, trying to help kind of build an understanding for those who maybe didn't have exposure. I grew up in Fresno. I grew up in Southeast Fresno, so that's kind of where my heart's been, in a very multicultural environment. I love that. That's where I spent, 10 of the last 12 years living. And then I got this really crazy story that sent me out to Reedley, California, and I became a pastor, even though I never officially actually worked in a church. And that's been a teaching experience. It's changing me, and I'm learning a lot from it. It's hard. It's a little harder than nonprofit work. Even in my nonprofit, we faced a lot of difficult situations, a lot of things facing families that are hardships, but they were kind of expected, and just the issues are very different. But here, it's been a challenge. So I'm a pastor. I've got 5 kids, and just celebrated my 12-year anniversary with my wife, who's been in
Hey,
ministry. Yeah,
congratulations! That's dope, man.
yeah, no, it's very good. But we got 5 kids, 3 adopted, 2 biological. We were foster parents and had anything from 2-year-olds to college students living in our home. We've had about 27 youth and children live in our home over the years, and that's been a big heart for us. My heart has always been, even when I was running a nonprofit, the way I started is I wanted to see the church engage communities better. When I became a Christian at 21, it was because I saw God's enormous heart for those who are in need, and that to be a Christian meant to live your life to help bridge those gaps between people who often are neglected in society, and that covered a whole lot of issues, whether it be orphans. The Bible always talks about orphans and widows, that deals with Jews and Gentiles and those ethnic divisions. There's so many issues, but the gospel is this great reconciler in all of them, and it's a big calling for anybody who says I follow Christ. And I didn't see that a lot in the church growing up, and I wanted to see it. That was my heart, is to see the church take more part in that in their city, to be a more active presence of Jesus. And now I'm leading a church, and it's hard. it is hard, and it's been a teaching moment,
So, Pastor, why do you think that the role of the church has been in the past a backseat to as it relates to social issues or anything that's progressive as it relates to moving society and the culture forward? Why do you think the church sort of kind of takes a backseat?
Well, that's a complex question. I would answer it in multiple ways. Maybe I'll move from the left to the right. So I would say on one end, I could do this whole thing on that question. And I don't even know that I have the answer, but I'll try my best with it. All right. So I would say on one end, individualism plays a big role in how we view our culture. Christianity here is very cultural, right? So we take our own view of Christianity here, and it's very individualistic. So much, at least for the last few decades, and maybe much longer than that, the focus on Christianity has been on the individual. My personal Savior, my personal Jesus, right? And it's church has definitely been shaped around that, and it's been shaped around the idea that we have to meet your needs. We're here to meet your family's needs. Now, not all of that is untrue. So the other side of that would say the church is all about what we do in the world or in the community, and it doesn't. But the thing is, I'd say the gospel doesn't deny that it is an individual issue, that there is such thing as individual sin. We do need to address and develop the family, and it equally speaks to what is the collective role, right? So Christianity is heavily a collective religion, but we live in an individualized society. But just because it's a collectivist religion doesn't mean that it denies the needs of the individual either, right? So we just have had trouble balancing that, I think, and doing both, where we focus on individual issues, struggles, sin, families, and trying to meet people where they're at individually in their life, and also maintaining this focus. Now, so that's, I think, a fundamental philosophical issue of how we view and interpret the scriptures, right? The other side of that, and the practical side that I've had to grow in understanding about pastors, is we deal with a lot of stuff, and most of it, I don't think seminary doesn't prepare you for most of the stuff you actually have to deal with.
For most of it doesn't prepare you. Yeah, seminary doesn't prepare you for like 92%.
It absolutely does not. And I would say, so I did half of my master's in counseling and multicultural counseling. And so I do more on that front to help figure out, I have to lean more on that front to help figure out most of the actual issues than I do on any of the biblical studies, right? And so, I think that's the thing, is we are dealing with people come to church expecting you to not only give good sermons, not only teach and educate about the scriptures, but to be counselor, to run an organization like you're a CEO and know how things work, to be a person who shows up by every funeral and wedding, and you marry and bury, and you're supposed to have answers you're a philosopher at the end of the day. You're supposed to have answers biblically about everything from the meaning of life to why people die to how do you overcome anxiety, and the bigger your church is, the more diverse your church is, which we have the fortunate, what I love is our church is a very diverse church, both socioeconomically. As far as Reedley goes, we are diverse ethnically as well, but there's only, we're about 70% Hispanic and 30% white in Reedley, and that about covers the gamut. We're not incredibly socially diverse as a group, as a city around here, but as far as that goes, our church is. But now you're supposed to understand how different cultures interact and be able to minister to them on all different levels. The family issues that people face are constantly coming up, from marriages, and so how do you balance? And then the bigger your church grows, the more people come in with, and you got people with mental health issues, addictions. We're doing CR. We're trying to help people just survive the teenage years with their kids. How do you get healthy? And dude, I mean, And then you've got hundreds of people interacting on that front while running while producing and while singing and production and videos and getting information out and writing curriculum. And then at the midst of that, you want to be focused on your community, in the midst of all that. And so on a fair side for those pastors who have a good desire and maybe aren't doing everything that they would like, it's overwhelming to figure out. And certainly there are pastors who neglect it and think it's not the job of the church, but there's a lot of good guys who want to be involved and just managing all that. They're barely surviving, of mentally figuring out how to handle things that they're not equipped for a lot of times, to handle that much stuff, So, so you got philosophical issues with it. Obviously the church has been segregated through history. And so that allows different groups to not have any perspective other than their own. And so if it's a white church, you don't see the needs because you're separated. But it's not just the church, right? Our neighborhoods are segregated. Our schools there's de facto segregation. So you can ignore what's really going on and never hear what's going on in your community if you just stay put in your little space within your walls, or within your community or within your certain part of town. As long as you're there, you may never really get a perspective that's different than your own, or you may never have friends who are of diverse socioeconomic and ethnic backgrounds to give you perspective other than your own. So you minister to what you know, right? And so, gosh, man, there's so many reasons, but I think that's a few of them. The practical side, the empathy for pastors, the neglect socially. I think there's a little gamut there. So,
yeah, I like to think of I always like to think of the church as being a gateway. And so I know we like to look at look at the condition of the world, but I always think okay, cool. The church is the gateway. So in other words, there are things that happen in society that I feel like if the church dealt with it and put a cap on it, that it wouldn't happen in society. So I feel like because the church is comfortable with neglecting real issues, people in the church seem to think that things will go away, especially if we don't talk about it. Which and that doesn't make sense nowhere else except for the church. It's not going to go away unless we tackle it, bring some type of spiritual insight into it, and shift it for the better. I'm baffled at some of the passive roles that some pastors play, and I think I hear a lot of what you say as it relates to there is a lot going on in any given church. You have so many different demographics that you got to cater to. Each one of them are different. You talk about age is one. Because you have the seniors that may not, they're seasoned in the word. They may not need as much attention as maybe like your teenage or your millennials. They may need a lot more attention. However, we still have to balance this social need for harmony as it relates to building community. I find it difficult, and I'm like, hey, man, if you're not building community, so I think every church builds community differently. So, and my idea of building community is making sure, one, that the radius around my church is the community is safe. It's healthy. People know that I'm here as a leader, that we're making more of an impact on the community around us more than just the people that come to this building. And that's I think that's been my rub with some pastors. They take this passive role as it relates to social issues that are plaguing our communities, and that's a rub for me.
Yeah. So let me not a disagreement. Let me I want to touch on one thing, because I 100% agree with you. I think we are. I think we can be too passive. I think we are afraid to address issues, and there's a lot of human reality to that. I would push back on this, that it's a church issue. It is a issue in the church. You're absolutely right. But let me give you an example. How many marriages avoid difficult topics because they don't want the conflict and they implode, right? How many leaders in businesses don't want to deal with somebody who's being a difficult employee and it implodes on them, right? Or somebody who's stealing from you and they don't want the conflict of it, right? I think and so I often think in psychological terms in human behavior. So forgive me on any perspectives on that, but I'm thinking on those terms of, I don't think it doesn't mean things are right. It's not a value statement. What I'm saying is our neglect is not unique to the church. It's the avoidance of conflict as a whole, right? And I would agree with you here. I think the church needs to address these things and has a responsibility to be in the forefront of the major issues going on in the world and sharing how the gospel views those issues, right? Because where else, if we believe this to be absolute truth, which as a Christ follower, I believe the scriptures to be truth, and they speak to ethnic diversity and they speak to the issues of different social groups and the needs of the poor and whatever it might be, right? Then we absolutely need to shed light, if we believe that to be the truth, on how to interpret those things through the gospel, and we can't be afraid of that. But the idea that it's an issue unique to the church, I would say it's the preeminent issue for the human condition, that there are a lot of people who, ultimately, there are people who will fight, but the average person is, I'd say statistically, the average person would rather avoid the constant conflict than address what needs to be done, even though addressing it would lead to greater health. And so I would say that's a human issue that we have to address. The fact that we want to avoid everything that's difficult and cause people to reject us, leave us, hate us. One of the greatest fears of humans is to be rejected, right? And when you speak out, you get rejected. I've faced it recently doing issues and speaking to issues on race. And you get people who you loved and they reject you, and it's hard, it hurts, but that's the cost, right? So, but a lot of times we avoid that because we don't want to rock the boat. So we have a responsibility. You're absolutely right. And then the equal side of that is, as humans, we often avoid conflict in our nature on all things, whether it be internally in our families. We don't like to address our own internal mental health conflicts. We try to avoid them in a lot of ways, right? Avoidance is unfortunately a key dysfunction. So
yeah. No, I get that. I get that. And so I'm with you 100% with that. I think there is, and I think I had somewhat of a conflict with one of my friends who I posted something online about white supremacy or something as it relates to the gospel and the way it's communicated. And I had a friend that sort of kind of got rubbed by it, and he was talking about it being a false narrative. And I hear some of that. I get that. I think for me, where I keep coming back to a rub is one thing to have information. Or the answer. So as Christians, we profess Jesus is the answer, Jesus is the way. Okay, great. But if we really believe that Jesus is the answer to all this chaos and all this turmoil, why do we communicate it in such a vague way as if he's not? And if he is, how are we communicating it so that it's clear? And it's clear, like, no, this is not something that as a Christian that I condone. I don't condone this behavior, just like I don't condone that. So it's interesting how again I just come back to leaders and pastors, just how I come back to the passivity, and I understand it is a human issue or a human condition, but I think
don't misunderstand me. I'm not approving of passivity, only speaking that I think it happens throughout people's lives. So how do you address passivity and encouraging people to speak up? I think that's one of the reasons people struggle to, and I'm assuming not everybody's got an intentional desire to not, I talk to a lot of pastors who won't speak up, but I know they're hurting inside. They don't know how to, right? And then that's not approval or disapproval. What I'm saying is,
right. I get that.
So,
I get that, and so I get that. I understand the not knowing how. I understand things that are difficult. I think most of us try to like, yes, I don't want to deal with that today. And we can pick and choose the things that we want to deal with and not deal with. So I understand the human condition. I it, it I guess the rub for me is how strong and confident leaders are about certain issues. They'd be like, "Oh, wait a minute now," It's like.
Well, in fairness, when you're preaching to the choir, so if you're confident about issues that everybody's going to agree with you on, if that's what you're preaching to, right? It's the ones that not everybody agrees with you on that you have to be one of the lone men in the room. That's when it gets hard. It's easy to sit there and be passionate and bold about things that 99% of the people are like, yeah, we're with you. It's a lot harder to be one of the few voices in the room saying the opposite of everybody. So that's why you can be bold on one and not as bold on the other, and I mean that my race series recently, that was probably the boldest I've been. And, there's pushback, and you have to go, okay, God, like who's here is who's here, like why would I want somebody who's offended by racial reconciliation conversations around the gospel? But it doesn't stop hurting. I mean, it hurts, man. Like people you call friends are, I'm raising Black children. And so to find out that people are that offended by me talking about racial reconciliation that they would leave, I'm like, what did you think I was going to be about raising my children? Like, what did you view us as? Like, what did what is your view of my kid then, who's an adult practically? It hurts, and so it's just, there's the reality. Yeah, we got to speak boldly. It definitely have the example of Jesus and of who didn't shy away from the hottest, most unwelcomed perspectives, with Pharisees and yet he paid the cost, right? I mean, abandoned by his disciples, hated by, those in power. And I think there's just a level of empathy. We call people to action, and you're absolutely right, Charlie. People need to call me to action sometimes. Sometimes I get scared, I'm tired of being hurt, and I'm sure a lot of people.
I get that.
Right. But I need people to push me and say, come on, Nick, you can do this. And people have, like they've encouraged me to keep going. And on the other side, just empathy that, man, like this is a constant, you're never doing enough, and it's never good enough for almost anybody. It doesn't matter what the topic is, when you're in that position, and so, it's, but you're right. I think we have an example in Jesus, and we talk about Jesus, and yet we're incredibly passive on things that he willingly was hated for, to speak up for, or even in his life. Yeah.
And I think we talk about persecution. And like you said, well, if I do this, I'm going to be persecuted. In my thinking, there's a such thing as good persecution.
Yeah.
So if I'm persecuted for the cause of Christ, that's good persecution.
Yeah.
So if I'm being persecuted for doing what's right, if I have this righteous indignation as it relates to social justice, I said this on my live a few weeks ago, for people that believe in Jesus but don't see that Jesus's journey was a journey of justice. That's a rub. That says to me that you don't know who Jesus was and what he came to do. His whole existence, or his whole movement in the earth realm, was about justification. It was about justice, and so putting us in right standing with God. So for us to, so that means, so when people don't, for me, it says, wait, maybe we believe differently about who Jesus was, and so I bow out because I believe something entirely differently than what some people believe.
And I think that's an issue. So I always kind of look at, I'm a big picture guy on things. What is the root stent? So many of the issues we talk about have an even deeper root. I touched on individualism. I mean, that's a bigger root to some of why people cannot understand each other, interpret the gospel differently. And that goes deep into our culture, right? This idea of being an individual, and it's my rights and the way, and my faith is private, and So if you're an individualist, how do you take collective responsibility for anything happening in your world, right? And so, so anyway, long story short, I think looking at the big picture, you know, I think people. Hold on, put your screen back. It's hard for me to talk to you without seeing you.
I'm here, buddy.
I know. No, but I think, I think. Anyway, I don't know. I think. I think we got to see what is the bigger root at what people are struggling with. And when you look at the gospel, Jesus is. He is about justice, but there's a big picture of justice too. He's trying to make everything right with man and God. Now that means there's a social implication to that, because that means if I'm right with God, I am right with others. To love God is like loving your neighbor as yourself. And he gives us the perfect example. It's not unclear when he uses the parable of the Good Samaritan, as the example of that. It's not unclear. It's very laid out what that means. And so I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's just interesting to me. And I had some young guys on my live a few weeks ago, and we talked about the cycle of hypocrisy as it relates to church. Because you see on one end, oh, listen here, we're not aborting no kids, and we're in favor. I'm with you. I'm good with that. But on the flip side of it, if a black or brown person gets shot, oh, that ain't my bag. I ain't got to what to do. So then across the board, then we can say that the church really isn't about preserving life, because it's like, oh, we don't know abortions, but then what about we're still trying to preserve life when they get here? Right. So if we're so adamant about people dying before they get here, well, when they get here, they're going to die. We don't create better systems to help the world be better.
I'm glad you brought that up. You're absolutely right. 100% agree with you. I think that's the issue, right? Like that comes from a theology, right? A theology that life matters. Where do we get that from? Nothing in culture, nothing in evolution can tell us that life matters, all right? You can create principles and constructs to try to convince yourself, but literally, if there isn't a purpose, then life is meaningless. I can destroy anything as I come, like it's survival of the fittest. So the theological position is that life matters because it was inherently created by God in the image of God. The nature of God is somehow indwells that person, right? So that means for abortion, fine, that's where we get that theology, but you're absolutely right. How does that play out in the life of every human being? And when we see injustice and disparities and racial issues and health issues and issues for those in poverty, that still plays out. Now, here's the bigger issue, is that so when we talk about the hypocrisy of the church, there's assumptions we're making that I think statistically don't bear out. Most Christians are not what has been done, convictional Christians. They couldn't articulate what their theology is or where it comes from, okay? Most of them don't read the Bible, and if they do, they get it in little excerpts from Jesus Calling, and they don't really have a good understanding of like why abortion matters according to Christians. They don't have a theological way of describing that other than bad and good dichotomous thinking, right? So let me put it this way. It's not just convictional. Most people are culturally religious, even Christians in America. We go to church, but we are culturally religious, but they couldn't articulate a fundamental principle that guides that. So they're going to be hypocritical in this sense, that they're inconsistent on their views because they're culturally developed. And their views don't correlate with the scriptures oftentimes because they're not actually developing them from a strong theological foundation. They're developing them from a pick and choose cultural milieu. But the vast majority of people, including many pastors, we are strongly cultural Christians. We have almost what's called a civic religion, we have developed somehow a merger, a syncretism, which is in the Bible. It's not unique to America. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, the prophets spoke to syncretism, which people took the values of other gods, other cultures, and synced them together with godly biblical backgrounds, right? And they merged all these beliefs together. And we're doing the same thing with individualism, with American values, with worshiping flags and worshiping God. Like, we don't see the distinction of it anymore, that this is idolatry. We don't see the distinction anymore because these things have merged together and we don't ask questions. So the vast majority of people statistically in church would be cultural Christians. You know, they believe in God, they attest to certain values that they've been told or raised in, but they couldn't actually articulate where those beliefs came from as a belief throughout the whole scriptures. They might be able to pull out a proverb or that Dave Ramsey said for why they can be wealthy, but they can't tell you how God tells you to use your money specifically through Luke 16 or whatever it might be, right? They don't have a theology of money. They have a theology of Ramsey. And so they're not getting it firsthand from the scriptures. And so when you bear that down, I believe statistically, only 10 to 20% of Christians actually can attest to the fundamental theological principles that they say they believe. The rest just go to church and have cultural beliefs. And so, of course, we're going to be hypocritical if we don't know why we believe what we believe. I was talking to somebody today about suicide because there's some stuff we're facing and going through here at the church with some people. Where did we get the belief that suicide sends you to hell? But it's rampant, right?
Right.
Where did it come from? It's rampant. It's a cultural belief. And
Right.
people will tell you it's a biblical belief. Find it. You know, where does it come from? And so much of what we believe has been culturally developed. And we do this, but we do this all in every culture. People do this. So much of religion, so much historically has been cultural religion. And if you want to, you got to go to those who have convictional beliefs to find out, are they consistent in what they believe? And I think a lot of people you'll find will be consistent from the beginning of life, the conception of life, to that of even death row inmates. You know, do you have a view of who's in charge of life? You know, that's theologically consistent. So,
Yeah, I think that's valid. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. That cultural has influenced a lot of our belief systems even more than scripture. So I get that. Yeah, I get that. I think that's valid. So then we have cultural issues then, as obviously. As it relates to this racial divide. It's just culturally we're different. For me, I think when we deal with racism, especially I think it plays to the basic part of who we are. When people have like strong racial issues with another person, because I'm of the belief system that we're all one family. However, when you have people that will bait someone into a conversation over racial issues, I think it just plays to the the low part of who we are. And I feel like that, I feel like there is no room or no place in the kingdom for it. So it's always interesting to me how Christians get caught up in it and don't, and they're not sound. But I guess it goes back to what you were saying earlier. People are, they believe more in the culture than they do in their actual belief systems. And so I wanted to start a YouTube show called "You Don't Know Your Bible," and
that would be good.
Just like, hey man, you think you know the Bible, don't you? I'm telling you, you don't have a clue. And so it makes me, obvious because I'm an analytical person, so I naturally think like, okay, cool. So are people so culturally consumed? Is that by design? Because I have come in contact with people that are passionate about things that the scripture actually says as it relates to unity, building up of community, taking care of the widows, taking care of the poor. And I think people have a lot. There are a lot of people that I know have those strong convictions, especially as it relates to justice and those types of things. It's always interesting, and I try not to intentionally have conversations with people that are. I try to listen to them that are just extreme to the left is like, or the right rather is like, let me hear you, because I think what you have to say is valid, and I think what you have to say is valid if you would think what I have to say is valid. Now you're not going to bully me in the conversation, right?
Right.
You're not
Yeah.
just going to bully me and communicating what you have to think without listening to my side as well. And so, as long as I can have conversations with people
Yeah.
that are open, then I'm good
Yeah.
with having conversations. The challenge
Yeah.
comes with people that are just dogmatic and their systems as if their way is the only way. And it's like,
Right.
hey, you're missing a boat, because I could debunk probably 5 statements. And it's interesting how people can throw scripture, and I'm like, I can debunk that with like 4 or 5 other scriptures,
No, for
and
sure.
we could be doing this dance all day long.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
so as a leader, man, sometimes I'm constantly, that's my constant conversation with God. It's like, man, this conversation is going nowhere fast. So like, I'm constantly going back and forth with scriptures, and they got 5 more to throw back at me. It's like,
And that's the
God,
thing. Cultural Christianity, they still know things in their Bible. They just know the ones that they're supposed to know culturally.
sure.
That's on the left and that's on the right, right? But they haven't developed, again, a consistent theological explanation for why they believe what.
Consistent. That's a good word, man. Consistent theology. That's good. That's good.
And it should guide you, because honestly, I think you've seen it, Charlie. We've talked about this privately. It doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right. They're both doing the same thing. They're picking what's it about. So I'll give you an example of myself. I came to faith because of a guy exposing me to ministry on Skid Row in downtown LA, right? And my heart broke. And then he shows me 1,000 scriptures on God's heart for the poor. All that is true, okay? But then my whole next 10 years of my life was only about that. So I could quote all those scriptures. I could tell you all about social justice, but there were some fundamental theological things that I was not spending a lot of time on. There was things I was neglecting. So it doesn't mean I have to pick or choose in this dichotomous thinking. It's that all of this is true within the scriptures, and I only was getting one side because that's the world I inhabited at the time, right? But then I start reading it for myself and realizing, man, there's complexity. There's other issues that are major within the Bible that I wasn't focused on, right? That shouldn't degrade what I also believe in on the other side. I don't need to swing the pendulum to the other side. I need to figure out how does this make sense and be consistent from an individual ethic to a social ethic to and it's very possible. The Bible's, in fact, I'll say it's the only thing in the world that really can weave it all together if you understand its overarching storyline and how it plays out. It weaves all of that stuff together: our social concerns, our individual needs, our emotional problems. I think there was an author who talked about modern Christianity being therapeutic, dualistic. I forget how he says it, but the whole point is we've become all about therapy. Like, it's all about individual therapy. And that's another reason we don't focus socially, because it's been all about how can I get you by today with whatever therapeutic issues you need, right? It's just helping you get by. And I think you and I, we've worked at different churches, and I think you can say across the board, doesn't matter what type of church it is, a lot of ways we're helping people get by, right? And when you talk about bigger social issues, that's no longer getting by. That's like structural change, and that's
right.
So how do we get out of the getting by mindset, and stuff like that? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because, in this process, I'm finding that people are more addicted to the process or the system of church, more so than they are with the righteousness of God, perhaps, if that makes any sense. Because so you can't ignore the science. I think everybody's different as it relates to how the pandemic is affecting them and how it's affecting their congregation. But just to completely ignore the science is like, So, then don't go to the doctors anymore, apparently, because you don't respect the science.
Absolutely.
So that's all interesting to me, that people are having conflict with the government about coming to church, and it's like, you are the church, so you show up everywhere all the time. You should anyway. So that's interesting, and so it's interesting. It's like, man, people are just addicted to the service or the programming of, or I wouldn't say programming, but maybe that's not the bad word, of church, and not so much as, okay, cool, how is this making me a better individual? Do I look more like God in my interactions with people, regardless to their race, regardless to their social status? Do I look like God wants me to look as it relates to how I interact with my brother? I think that's more of the call and the charge, more so than, and I'm in favor of congregating. I get that. I understand the value in that, but to the point where it's more than being doing right by people, is like, so what are we doing here? What's happening? Yeah. So that's yeah.
No,
I don't know
agree.
if you are dealing with that, and I think that's cool that you guys have been, because you all have been meeting outside, right?
Yeah. We've never gone inside. We never went back, even when they let us, because I knew we were going to shut down again. So, so we've stayed outside. We're doing a good job of distancing. But no, you're right. This has been the most divisive time I've ever seen in the church, and it's going through every issue, right? Like from coronavirus to Black Lives Matter. Like, I mean, it's wild, because people are just taking the harder and harder line stances to a point where we cannot talk about any differences, or else we're gone, right? Like, I won't wear a mask, but you're required to wear masks. Like these things that particularly should not matter. And yet it's a I'm leaving my church if you don't open type of issue for people, right? I mean, I got a friend here in town who's been called a coward because he opened sooner than most of us, and yet was called a coward as a pastor and leader because he wouldn't open sooner, right? I mean, people are getting beat up no matter what they decide, and it really gets to the heart, which is, why are we all at this place where we can't listen to somebody else, where anybody who differs is destroyed or demonized, right? What has happened in culture that you, like you said, I would love to sit. I actually, in the midst of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, I had a lot of people. You and I talked for hours, and then the next day, some police officer friends of mine came and talked because they were bothered by some things I had written on it, But all of them were amazing conversations. We were having those conversations of like, listen, here's my very different perspectives, but being able to meet each other and go, hey, I hear you, and I didn't think of it that way. What is preventing that as a culture at large? What has come? I have some thoughts on it, but that will take an hour. So, but what is preventing us to get to that point where we can hear somebody who disagrees and it not completely contort our perspective of them from, in a conversation. And I mean, that's a big issue, our inability to articulate perspectives without it being a black or white. And I don't mean that racially, but like without it being this, I'm going to leave if you're the person or that person. I mean, categorizing everything into singular groups, like we all think just unilaterally the same on one issue or the other,
right.
Life is complex, man.
Yeah, it is complex, and I think as we can, I've just equated it to, I think there are a lot of systems that we've had in place that failed us. So I think about our educational system. I was fortunate enough that I was in a group called Mock Trial, and so it was actually designed to just debate. We had different issues. It was basically a debate team. But I learned sort of kind of early on, and all these people that we were debating with, they were my friends. But we literally just knocked down tackled some issues, and we had to put a whole mock trial together around a certain issue, and whoever presented the best, I guess the best trial or the best prosecution, whatever, then that's who won. But I think if we were taught that from an early age, like it's okay to debate with someone, or it's okay to have conversations with someone that don't think like you, And it's okay. And if people don't agree with you, don't mean that they're your enemy. It's just that's an area where we agree to disagree, and it's
Yeah.
okay. And I have a lot of friends that even on this issue of Black Lives Matter, we don't agree. And so I
Mhm.
understand, like, okay, cool. I value this person being in my life. They have
Yeah.
proven themselves to be a real friend. At the end of the day, um, if we can't talk about it, I understand we can't talk about it. But
Right.
there are other things that we can talk about.
Yeah.
And I think that so the education system, I feel like, broke
Well, that's
there.
hard
But
though,
then
right? Like, it,
socially, like in our families, that should have been something that we've been taught as well. So we have two
yeah.
systems that I feel like sort of kind of failed us.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. But I think that's the issue, right? We can't talk about it. Like, you shouldn't have to hide the pain or the struggles that you've been in with somebody that you say you care about, right? Now, and they shouldn't have to do the same either. But that's the issue. It's like, well, let's just not talk about it, you know? Well, that's a hiding a part of who you are, which is, nobody wants to do that. Like, why would I want to be friends with somebody I can't be real about the fact that I've experienced things with police officers that have been unjust, or, why would I want to hide that from somebody? But equally, why does the other person have to hide what they're feeling or the doubts they're having about issues, and because they're afraid that they're going to get raked across the coals, because they have, and it's not even like a strong thought. It's like, well, what if, and we live in a culture where you can't share your story without without being blamed. What's funny, I'm neither left nor right, but I wrote something about just the experience of raising African American kids in a mixed race family, and in a in an area in Reedley where there's not a lot of Black people, and the stuff that they've had to face. And what's funny is I wrote some stuff about biblically how do we view this, and I'm getting called Marxist and all this other stuff. Well, I have nothing to do with that stuff. I don't hold any beliefs of that. But it's like you're categorized as soon as you're like, hey, I have some perspectives that are a little different on this, right? We're doing that on every side.
Yeah.
We're going to categorize you as, this or that, or you're a weak leader, or you're, divisive if you speak up, or, or whatever it might be, right? And I mean, at the end of the day, here's the thing. The gospel says this. The gospel, I always talk about tensions, and it's one of my favorite things about the Bible. Every major concept has a tension to it. And a tension for me is there's two extremes that you're literally living in, not compromised, that you're living in these two extremes, and how difficult that is to do. That's the call, right? And the gospel calls us to do right, to do justice, to love mercy, right? But it also says you and I are deeply flawed, in need of a savior, right? And so some part of culture says, it's wrong to assume you're deeply flawed. Like, there's nothing wrong with us. Like, well, if we all understand that we deeply have injustice and prejudice in our hearts, and we all understand that I am prone to greed or sexual sin, or we are all prone to that. And yet we're not all evil or bad. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we're all prone to the same types of things, and yet we all desire the same types of things, which is people to love us, respect us, hear us, care what we've walked through, right? Then how can I view anybody as much worse than me? So when you lose that portion of the gospel and you become about the righteousness of the gospel, the justice of the gospel, but you lose the portion that says we are all deeply flawed by the same type of sin, then you could start getting angry at everybody. Everybody's stupid now because they disagree with me, or everybody is lazy or racist because they struggle with things that they don't understand or haven't listened well, right? But how do I hold anybody as more deeply flawed than I am if I understand the gospel that, man, there is something within me that wants to reject God. And when I reject God, I reject his wisdom. And when I reject his wisdom, I reject the fact that there should be equality and love for others. And when I reject his wisdom, I reject the idea that I should be generous with my money to those who are needy. Like, I just bring on cultural values that says, no, they should earn it themselves. Like, I reject the biblical things because I rejected the idea that I deeply needed grace. That's the Bible. I deeply need grace. If I'm not hearing that every day, then how am I going to ever extend grace? It is my nature to be self-righteous as it is yours. to say I'm better than others, and other people are stupid, and other people are lazy, and other people, and the only way out of that is to go, no, you know what? I need God's grace, and look at the ways I need his grace and how he's given it. Therefore, I can see myself in other people who are different than me, because even though I may not be doing what they do, I am just as capable, or I'm doing it differently. And so
Absolutely.
it's the rejection of us as individuals, of the idea that I deeply need grace that allow me to be pissed off at the whole world who disagrees with me and calling them names, and I can be upset. I can take action. The grace should make me both active socially, because I know what God has done for me, and yet graceful in my approach to it, because I know what God has done for me. Right? Like I am the orphan that he has adopted into his family. I therefore need to take an active social role in the lives of orphans and the foster system and adoption system, right? But I equally have to do it with grace. So when I'm actually raising my kids who come with trauma and issues that make you angry and frustrated and pain, you also have to sit there and go, what has God done for me? Because I have to extend the same grace individually as well,
Absolutely.
right? So when you get that, you're both socially active and you're humble in your approach to do it, but we're not. So what's missing? That portion, whether I'm a liberal Christian who sees social justice, but everybody who doesn't do it is awful and evil, or I'm a conservative Christian, who walks around being super moral and judging everybody who is struggling or different or hasn't yet arrived as they're all less than and going to hell. Like, it all comes from a lack of understanding of God's role in my life. Grace. And that's a fundamental, I hate to sound religious, I think it's a practical application. Do you understand that? Do you have a consistent understanding of grace through the whole of your life? Because it should make you socially active, and it should make you incredibly generous with those people who are different than you.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago on one of my lives, and I talked about the importance of each one of us bursting our bubble. And it comes from the idea that we all, and it's possible, you, me, every person on the earth, we were all born into a bubble. We're born into a certain culture. We didn't choose. We were just born into it. So we were given a deck of cards that we have to handle. And it is possible that because we're all born in this bubble, or this even religious bubble, that we do have to, as we grow, and it's a part of our maturation process, that as we come out of the bubble, and I think college does that for us, but also working in any type of environment, whether it be corporate America or if it's at McDonald's, whatever, it forces you into outside of your bubble, into interacting with other people that may not be a part of that bubble. And when you I think it's a part of your maturation process is as you begin to interact and build rapport with people that are different from you, that as you identify areas where you may be racist or biased, having real relationship with people other than people that look just like you helps to pop that bubble, helps to burst that bubble, and then I no longer see people just my interactions is just not with the people that's in my bubble. I have a multicultural experience, because this country that we live in is a melting pot. It's a melting pot of a whole lot of cultures. It was actually designed to be that way. And so with that being said, it's always interesting, and so I agree with 100% what you just said. It is important that we try to pop those bubbles, man, and realize that we're in a world, man, that has a multi faceted groups of people. They come from different backgrounds. They are different. No two people are alike. So just like you can't speak for all the white people, I can't speak for all the black people. You're an individual. I'm an individual. And so we just have to respect each other's all as individuals with different ideals, different opinions. And I think the moment that we can embrace other people's ideals that are especially different from ours, and I think we're part of helping the world move forward. always challenge people that profess Christianity, like, hey, don't be absent in this process because the world don't heal without us. It just don't heal. The world don't heal without us. And so we can take this backseat approach, which is the reason why I have an issue with pastors that are passive. Is like, hey, the world is not going to heal without you getting involved in this process. So we can take the passive approach if we want to. At the end of the day, we are just holding back healing that could come to our communities very rapidly if all of us would get into this fight and move this whole thing forward. So that's just sort of kind of my take on it. I feel like that there does need to be more healthy conversations about this whole idea of race. And anytime I come in contact with a racist person, regardless of their race, I'm like, man, that is so basic. You're playing to the basic part of who you are. There's so much more to you than just your complexion. And I get it where people can't see it. As long as you see it, you celebrating that, and you can't get thrown off by basic people.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, man, I always enjoy our conversations, man. They're always rich and they're always good, man. So I appreciate you just for being who you are, man. For being your unique self, man. I really appreciate you, bro. I really do.
Thanks, you too, Charlie, man. I appreciate you doing all this.
Yeah, man. It's so important, man, that we get over ourselves enough to heal. Because it is so true.
Right. Like, that's the big point for me is people have to, there's got to be humility within faith. And humility doesn't breed passivity, that's feigned humility. Humility, means that I'm aware of how much God has done for me, and therefore I want to do as much for others as I can. And it means being called out. You're right. As leaders, we have been called to more. That's for sure. So I did the example that all people struggle with passivity as a whole. The majority of people do. The others don't have friends very long. And then for us to just say what we think, oftentimes it doesn't go well for your friendships, but as leaders, you're right.
But it needs to be said. It has to be said.
And also, I'm not the best at it, man. I fear rejection and I wrestle with that. But, you're right that it also takes humility to hear it from somebody to go, Nick, man, I need you. I need you to speak up, or I need, and how do I do that? And at the same time, it takes humility for me to go, hey, man, I'm wrestling with this complexity of stuff at the church. How can I do this and do that? And just the grace that I'm working through that, and processing that. And I'm not, letting it slide. Like I want to be better, and that it takes humility for all of us to approach that. And we're not a culture of humility, that's for sure,
Yeah. And then that's what we have to build back for Christians that need a scripture to fall back on. We can go back to Isaiah that says, if my people who are called by my names will humble themselves and seek my face, I will heal the land. And that's something that we pray, that God heals the land. But again, it doesn't happen without us. That's what people don't get. The world doesn't move forward. It doesn't heal without us. I'm in the process of writing a book, and the title of the book is really simple. When I heal, you heal. Man, if people really got that concept, that there are certain areas in my life emotionally, and in my soul that I have to heal. I'm not an authority to heal anybody else in these areas until I've tackled them and mastered them myself. And so something I try to encourage, they're like, hey, do your personal work, please heal, because when you heal, the rest of the world can be healed by you. But as long as we hide behind racism and any other type of cause that keeps us divided, then we're not healing, and we become part of the problems rather than solutions. And so a big part of the solution is, hey man, take some time and heal you. Deal with your ish. I have a t-shirt is called "Get Your Ish Together." Uh, and that is a part of it. We all have certain levels of trauma that we all have. I have trauma with the police because of my experience with the police, and not until people can acknowledge that, like, that's a real thing. That is
No,
a
for sure.
real thing. That is a real
Oh,
thing that as a that, for people who don't have that experience, I'm like, oh man, well, that's cool. I'm glad you don't have
yeah,
that experience. That is dope. But I
yeah,
do, and so there have been platforms where there have been a lot of a few celebrities that are black, and they said they've never had any
yeah,
deals with the police. I was like, I get that, man. And
yeah.
so because I'm neither left or right either. um the interesting thing is that the far right will bring these black people to say,
Oh,
see,
yeah,
tell them that there's nothing wrong with the
yeah.
police.
Well,
It's
and
like,
that's
hey, where I
yeah,
respect this black guy for his
right.
experience, that's
Yeah,
not my experience.
yeah, man.
And
If
so
I can
I'm
get
constantly
Candace Owens
screaming.
on my side, right? Like if I can get Candace Owens on my side, then it's true, you know. So, yeah, she represents all black people, but
That Candace Owens.
but, but I mean, don't we all do that, right?
Absolutely.
There was this comedian once who was talking about going out and fighting with his girlfriend, and the response is always, "Where's my girlfriends that agree with me?" Right? Like it's like I'm gonna go get everybody who agrees with me, and I'm gonna find
Right.
that one person. It doesn't matter how ridiculous my argument is, and it's gonna prove that this is facts, man. And
Yeah.
but we're all doing that, everybody's doing that right now. Like, let me show you the one example of how every Christian is bad. I mean, the reality is, Charlie, like you've had your experiences, I've had mine for sure. And I will continue to find things that I dislike in church and pain with it. But there's a lot of good. Do I see how many awesome people are investing? And then people who have shaped me have been doing this for 40, 50 years, talking about these things before it was even in vogue and to have a conversation, but before anybody was talking about it, right? Like these people set the path for me, and there's a lot of people like that. But why, Charlie, we're not the ones usually on social media blasting everybody.
That's true.
You're doing your work, and you're doing it privately. You're doing on this, moments of clarity. It's a positive thing. Like the people who are really trying to be engaged aren't hating on everybody loudly, and I think the majority of people are somewhere trying to figure it out. I really believe that. I'm not an incredible optimist by any means. I don't think greatly of human nature, but I do think that the majority of people are trying to figure this out and wrestle through it and figure out what their role is in these issues that we're all facing. And then you got some loudmouths on each side saying, well, look at these dumb celebrities who agree with me. I mean, I had one Christian guy post Lil Wayne as proof that hold on a second, sorry. I had one guy who posted Lil Wayne as proof that people don't struggle with police brutality. And I'm like, really, Lil Wayne? I bet you it's like guy's 60 Christian. You're a Christian who's 60 years old posting Lil Wayne. I'm like, have you heard his songs? Guarantee you wouldn't agree with him. And yet he's proof, that all this is true, right? Like we're all doing it, and we got, and it's got to stop. But so.
Yeah. So that's my prayer. My prayer is that through logic, that's why Moments of Clarity was invented. That perhaps through logic, I'm a natural logician. So
Yeah.
for me, things just have to make sense. And when it don't make sense, that's actually the root of all my anxiety. So all the anxieties of my life comes from things either being unclear or just like, wait a minute, that's a problem. That's a problem. And so me having an understanding of that, actually, logic has been the only thing that's helped me to heal. Once I can reconcile something like, okay, yeah, this is right. This is just wrong. There's no other way to look at it. It's just wrong. That's just what it is. And so that's actually helped me to heal and to progress and stay sort of kind of vigilant with this idea of trying to help communities heal like one person at a time. And and prayerfully that a lot of these the lives that I have, they'll get 2 to 3,000 views, but it's usually after the which is I'm good with that.
Yeah,
Because I can see the numbers constantly increasing, and so that means that this is making an impact, as small as people may think it is. It is a small little pond, and or whatever, a small little drip in the pond, but
yeah.
even that makes an impact. You know what I'm saying, on the whole, the way the current and everything is moving. So I
I think,
appreciate you taking some time to just talk about this. We had questions that we didn't get to.
yeah, I
Um,
know. Yeah,
but this was just good, man. Just being able to talk one on one,
yeah,
even sharing some of the conversations, like even that we've had privately about, man, the world is in a rough place right now, and the church don't look the healthiest. But let's try to make do with what we got. You know.
hey, one
Yeah.
thing I hope on, here's my hope, man. There's an optimistic spin on the church. And we've talked about a lot of that stuff, and I get it. I've walked my own tough road with church. But here's the optimistic spin, man. We often look at our moment in time like it's somehow demonstrably awful, or everything's wrong with the church. There's always been a remnant, man. Like, it doesn't matter if you go to the Old Testament, there was only a 10% remnant that really loved God and really got it right. Like, if you go to the New Testament, Paul's writing all his letters in the Bible. Why? Not because the church is so cool, but because it's so dysfunctional, and there's really only a few that are like really giving their lives to the gospel, right? Really giving their lives to Christ, and like trying to do this thing that he's called them to as disciples. Like, throughout history, there's always been a remnant, man, like a 10% that, and there's actually a book on this. I'm blanking on the title, but anyway, it's a data-driven book by Barna's group, and it talks about how it's still, if you do the data, only 10% of Christians really have a theological belief that they back up by what they do in their lifestyle and their families and their social activity, and it's about 10%. It's still the same, man, and so it's hard. It's miserable. Paul struggled with probably struggled with depression in writing the Church of Corinth, because people did church but didn't quite get it. But the hope is that God still takes like 10% of people who are in love with him and do phenomenal things to change the world. He still takes people like Paul and bridges gaps that were there for thousands of years between Jews and Gentiles, right? He still takes this 10% remnant who then change everything. And we can't hold out hope on the annoying idiots who make up the 80-90% on social media who don't really know what the Bible says. We got to hold out hope that, there's, even if it's 10% of churches, like they can change the world according to the scriptures. So anyway, little positive spin. Just find those people in the 10%,
Good deal. I appreciate
Yeah.
you, man. Thank you so much for taking the time, man, to talk with me. I appreciate it, bro.
Hey, it's my pleasure, man.
Yeah, and I know you have a lot going on. So you just hired a new Spanish pastor, and your staff is growing amidst all this stuff that's going on. So I appreciate you just taking some time out to talk with me. It means a lot.
No, it's my pleasure, man. All right, dude.
All right, man. All right. I appreciate you, bro. Have a great rest of your week, buddy.
You too. I'll talk to you later.
All right, we'll talk soon. Okay. All right, cool. All right, cool, guys. And that was Nick Jones, my buddy, my brother from another mother. I so appreciate him and his gift to the body. I appreciate it. Today, I just wanted to let you guys know I did get this is my L3G Love Life, Love God hat, and my new V-neck T-shirt just came in as well. So there are a couple of changes I'm going to make to it, but it is available. It's online. It's available if you wanted to purchase, and that way we could be twinning out in these streets. But thank you for taking time to be a part of Moments of Clarity. I appreciate you taking the time out of your Tuesday to hang out with me. It does mean a lot. And I hope that you're getting something from these talk times that we have. I know we talk about a lot of different issues, a lot of different social issues. We also talk about, like last week I had my guest, Manisha Edwards, who is a business owner and an entrepreneur. So we're going to be doing a lot more of that, bringing more entrepreneurs to the table to talk about their processes and talk about some of the things that they're doing in the midst of this pandemic, how their businesses are growing, and um, and then some that may be facing some challenges as well. But we want you to meet entrepreneurs that are doing great things in the community. And so we're going to be having that coming up on next week, though. I am going to do a throwback show. I wrote a show probably, we did it in 2017. It's called Music Matters. And on next week, I'm going to have some of my cast on, and we're going to be talking about that experience of doing a play uh, for a live audience, and we'll talk with some of the cast members. They'll talk about some of them. For a lot of them, it was their first experience working with me as a director, as a writer, as a producer. And so you'll get a chance to meet some of them. Music Matters was an interesting ride, but we nevertheless we got a chance to do. I think we did 4 shows, and then I think we did a revamp show for the hurricane victims. I think we did another show that we just added for the community. So we'll be talking to the cast on next Tuesday. So be here, be live for that. That's going to be really, really cool. And then go to the website and check out some of my L3G gear. I'm going to be doing some sports jackets as well. That will be launching later on this month as well. So so that people are knowing, they're clear about what this stands for. It's love life, love God, and you'll see the 3 L's and the G. But this is the new logo for Love Life, Love God. And this brand was birthed out of most people won't even know it to be true, but I'm going to tell you because it is the truth. But Love Life, Love God was actually birthed from this whole idea of me loving life or falling in love with my life experience. Even though growing up and still as an adult, I deal with depression. I think every creative person deals with some form of depression, but I deal with depression sometimes very, very heavily, and I have to balance that out in my own life. Never been medicated for it. I don't think I need to be medicated for it. I just think I need to know what it is, identify it, and make sure that I am bringing and including more positive things into some of my daily confessions. Make sure I have positive mantras. Make sure I have positive people around me. That's so very, very, very important because otherwise, depression. And I know Pastor Nick talked about someone in his congregation was dealing with depression. It is a real thing. Um, and depression comes obviously when we realize that, man, the world is in a rough place and there's nothing that we can do about it. A lot of people that are depressed are natural empaths. So empaths could be extremely um, high as far as happy or joyful, or extremely depressed. That is possible for we could be at one or two extremes. What we have to learn how to do is master that superpower and bring all of our energies right back to the middle. Where we understand the darkness that's happening in our life, it is real. However, we do have to shine more of a light on the positive things that are happening in our lives and celebrate that as well. So, love life was me falling in love with my experience, my life experience. All the trauma that came with that, all of the trauma from people that hurt me, but also from people that I hurt, because I can't just complain about the people that hurt me without realizing that, yeah, I've hurt people too. So, love life was me falling in love with my life experience. And then the obvious, love God because of who he is, the giver of life. So that's the clothing line story in a nutshell. Love life, love God. I hope you guys go and support it. It is www.l3gurbanwear.com. It stands for Love Life, Love God. And until next week, I want you guys to make sure that you are staying positive. That's very, very important. Stay positive. It's important that you do that. Stay positive, stay creative. It is so important that you stay creative in this space, especially people that are naturally depressants. It's important that you got to get clear about what you're depressed about, what you are unhappy about. There's a lot that's going on in our life that can just naturally make us unhappy. We have to be sure about what that is, identify what it is, and then develop solutions. I'm telling you, you are one idea away from creating a solution to whatever that negativity is in your life. So you're one idea. I like to tell people to think their way out. You're creative enough to think your way out of whatever negative space you could be living in right now. So I want to encourage you to do that. Stay positive, stay creative, but more than anything else, stay clear. We'll see you next week. Take